Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melanie Cuffs, the Scientific Officer of the Global Seaweed Coalition. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar on understanding the J-Blue credit mechanism in Japan. So it's following a discussion with Brian at the last UNOC that I found fascinating, this successful yet unknown mechanism existing in Japan. The Japanese government has managed in the last 5 years to mobilize private sector funding for seaweed restoration and aquaculture projects through state-approved blue credit. As this mechanism has not yet been translated from Japanese to English, Dr. Brian Tsuyoshi Takeda will guide us through the successful model that we will encourage other state actors joining today to take inspiration from and take part of the discussion following this presentation. But first, a few words from Dr. Philippe Potin, our scientific director and co-founder of the Global Seaweed Coalition, to introduce our activities and more about the keynote speaker today. Wishing you all good learnings and an interesting webinar.
Thank you, Melanie, and hello to everyone. It's really a pleasure to introduce this important talk today. Of course, as a scientific director of the Global Seaweed Coalition, I have to say a few words about the coalition, which is a global partnership established to support the safe and sustainable development of the seaweed industry as it scales up. So we do that through our 4 action pillars: funding, advocacy, science, and policy. We provide seed funding for projects through call for proposals, spread the seaweed narratives in global, national, and local forums, share knowledge about scientific, technological developments and good practices, and drive and influence policy change from local to global levels. The coalition was launched in March 2021 with initial funding of £3 million from the Lloyd Register Foundation and the support of the French National Research Center and the United Nations Global Compact organization. We have delivered 1.5 million euros through competitive calls for proposal for projects established in 32 different countries. We have secured additional funding recently from the Boulder Vision Foundation to sustain our activities, and we will continue seeking funds to launch further calls for proposals in order to support more seaweed projects globally. So, focus on our scientific and technological pillar. I have the pleasure to lead a council of 15 scientific specialists based in top research institutions in all continents to advise and assess projects received out of the call for proposals. We organize workshops and webinars, such as this one, on regular basis, leading to working groups and policy papers. So last ones were focused on methane reduction from livestock, CO2 capture from seaweeds, pests and diseases on specific seaweed species, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, seaweed in Africa. You can find them all online on our YouTube channel. On the policy front, there is an important actuality. The coalition supported the launch of the UN Global Seaweed Initiative, which was announced last week at UN Global Assembly, UN General Assembly at New York. It is led by Madagascar, France, Indonesia, and Chile, and also receiving the support from Brazil. So, with the government, several UN agencies are already supporting the initiative, including FAO, UNCTAD, UNIDO, UN Global Compact, and IOC UNESCO. This initiative elevates our actions and collaboration within the seaweed sector to the next level, which is also why it was relevant to draw inspiration from a government-led initiative today. Last, GSC members represent the entire seaweed value chains, from smallholder farmers to multinational businesses, specialized research institutes to intergovernmental organizations and civil society members. We are all working together to realize the full potential of the seaweed sector and to ensure its safety for consumers, workers, and the environment. We now gather more than 2,000 members. So, during our discussion today, please feel free to post questions or comments in the chat. We will take them during the discussion following the presentation. The presentation from Brian will last between 25 to 30 minutes, which will leave time for state representative and others to engage. So now turning to Brian's talk, the objective today is really to introduce the JBlue credits and to highlight how state-approved credits can catalyze private sector innovation and funding in Japan. In 2020, Japan Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism established the Japan Blue Economy Association to develop JBlue credits, the world's first state-approved voluntary nature credit mechanism designed to support blue carbon ecosystem restoration. 5 years on, this pioneering credit systems focused on carbon, biodiversity, and community benefits remains a leading case study for coastal nation seeking to mobilize private sector innovation and finance ocean restoration initiative, including both wild seaweed forest and farm seaweed operations. Our keynote speakers, Dr. Brian Takeda from the Secretariat of International Affairs at the Japan Blue Economy Association in Norway, has long been involved in seaweed discussions. Many of you may know him from his renowned company, Earthgenomics, and more recently as co-founder of Restorai. Today, Brian is generously giving this presentation on a voluntary basis to share the successful model Japan has developed in linking carbon credits to seaweeds, while also recognizing the scientific uncertainties that still exist. So without further ado, Brian, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Philippe. Again, hello, everyone. Brian Tsuyoshi Takeda. It's very kind of you to offer me a doctorate title. I do not have a doctorate, so I'm just a regular Joe, but very much passionate about kelp and kelp ecosystems. But yes, very happy to be here today to share some of the experiences that we have from Japan that hopefully can inspire other governments to engage much more deeply in the conversations around blue carbon ecosystems. So let me see if I can get the technology right first. Hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. I have to press that. Ta-da! Did it work?
Perfect.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay, great. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. So my name is Brian Tsuyoshi Takeda. As Philippe mentioned earlier, I've been involved in many ocean-related ventures, but the Japan Blue Economy is one of the two main nonprofit initiatives that I contribute my time to. And I'm doing this primarily because I feel it is so critical that governments that are currently drafting up their nature restoration laws, their credit mechanisms to understand what examples are out there so that rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, they could take good ideas from existing ones, dump the ones that are not useful for your relevant countries, but essentially take the lessons that I've learned from the last 5 years. So I'll break up my presentation into 4 short parts. One is the introduction of JBE, so Japan Blue Economy, as well as what the JBlue credits are. I'll then go into what has developed since the launch of the JB or the Japan Blue credits, and then where we see things going in the future. And then finally, I'll close with my personal thoughts of what could be over the horizon and what questions we should be asking going forward. Yes, so again, introduction. So Japan Blue Economy is led by Dr. Tomohiro Kuwae, and we have, let me just move this here, Professor Nobutoki and Professor Watanabe. And I am the Secretariat of International Affairs, which is really just a very complicated way of saying that I sit outside of Japan. And it is my responsibility to communicate the developments of the JBE to stakeholders abroad, particularly state to state. So my engagement is mostly focused on engaging with government entities to communicate what the Japanese government and the Japan Blue Economy has achieved in the past. So as mentioned earlier, so Japan Blue Economy is a unique organization. It is what we call an independent research cooperative, which is it sounds like a little bit of an oxymoron in a way, but essentially it's a unique entity that allows for scientific independence while operating with the blessing of the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism. So essentially, it has the approved status as an entity with the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure, yet it can essentially maintain its own independence by having it structured as a research organization. The purpose of the organization really is two major thematic concepts from a philosophical perspective. One is, of course, to empower conservation, restoration, and creation. And I include creation in here because part of the logic is that just returning what we used to have is not enough in order for us to achieve the kind of targets that we need to achieve to get to get our planet back in order. The other thing is also that we need to ensure that it is developing new methods and new technologies to deepen our relationship with the ocean. That part is purposely left kind of blurry and big so that it doesn't quite translate that well into English, but essentially it means that we need to holistically look at the oceans. The philosophical approach to JBE really comes down to something that given the scientific audience here, I thought I should highlight the cost of inaction. So to not do anything today is such a travesty relative to the knowledge and science that we have today that it is imperative that we move towards action while recognizing that there are still uncertainties that need to be resolved. So really, the point about the JBE is, philosophically speaking, it's about using the best available science that we have today. So rather than trying to get everything perfect and waiting or essentially excusing inaction, let's use the science that we have today and make progress, improve the science as we go along, but also improve the action, improve the implementation as we go along. So yes, so now into the JBlue credits. Okay, so what are JBlue credits? JBlue credits are effectively, I believe still today, is the world's first state-sponsored or state-approved blue carbon and nature credit that includes wild and farmed seaweeds, as well as seagrasses, tidal flats, and mangroves, and other classic blue ecosystems. I want to emphasize the state-sponsored or the state-approved aspect of this because most of the credits in the world today, if not all of them, are not state approved and does not carry the same credibility as this particular one. Because once a credit has the stamp of the state, it really changes the characteristic and the how should we say, the underlying truth behind the credibility. What I also think is quite unique about this credit is that while it is technically a carbon credit, it allows the stacking of multiple ecosystem services on that carbon credit. So it's essentially a combination of a classic carbon credit, but also combining it with a biodiversity credit, combining it with a coastal benefits credit, combining it with a nutrient absorption. Essentially, all the other ecosystem services that inherently come from a restoration project can be lumped on top of the carbon credit. The credit itself is quite unique also in the sense that it's trading at a significantly higher premium than most credits out in the market. And we're talking on an average of around $400 to $460 US a ton for 1 ton of CO2 sequestered. That really puts it at a whole nother geometric level than the pricing that we see in the rest of the world. And that is primarily because of the other ecosystem services that are quantified of course, philosophically speaking, also the JBlue credits follow the ICVCM's core carbon principles. Another thing to highlight, especially for those that are in the policy space and from government, the credit does not credit the actual capital or the natural capital or the underlying natural capital per se. It's actually the flow of value that comes from that natural capital that drives the credit. The meaning, if I were to parse it a little bit further, it means that what we're not doing is we're not saying, hey, we should sell state assets and turn them into credits. It's no, the state continues to own the underlying asset like the ocean. But the credit essentially says, okay, the value that comes from that asset that the state owns, we can turn the flow of that value into a credit. So it's it's a little bit philosophical, but it's quite important to underline that we're not talking about privatizing public goods. The other thing to also highlight in the credit mechanism is also the way the MRV, or the monitoring, reporting, and verification works. Unlike typical credits, which usually project 20, 30 years into the future, ask for money today for future carbon potential. The approach is actually the other way around. It's very much a post-intervention credit. So you do the intervention, you do the MRV, or you monitor and you document that the actual carbon has been sequestered. And only then is the credit is issued. And the credit is only issued for 1 year, meaning that you need to do the monitoring again each year to ensure that the restoration is happening and the carbon is actually being sequestered. As of today, the credit mechanism is still 100% domestic, meaning that it is all done within Japanese law, Japanese currency, Japanese language. Part of the reason why a lot of this information is not made available abroad, but it is specifically targeted domestically. And the whole point of this was they did not want to complicate the establishment of what is a pioneering credit solution by integrating it with multiple countries and making it into a big mess that's hard to manage. And I think that lesson could also be taken to other countries around the world because this is something new for a lot of countries, even for Japan, starting domestically. And then, once the concept is well established, peeking over the hedges and looking, to other markets using Article 6, I think is the approach to go. Um, Finally, the science that is used to assess the biodiversity and other ecosystem services values uh, it's understood that the science is not perfect yet. It's understood that we do not have scientific consensus on how a biodiversity credit should function, or what the methodology should be. So the whole idea is to allow the science to continue to mature and become part of this solution, and to help ensure that the credits have the credibility. There's an independent scientific board that evaluates the various methodologies that are being introduced to quantify the biodiversity in each project. So again, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this graph, so I won't spend too much time. But essentially, because we're talking about deep sea sequestration, the blue carbon, especially particularly for seaweeds, is in the top right-hand corner of both additionality and long-term removal. So I'm going to do just a little bit of a side-by-side comparison of the credits that we're quite commonly familiar with, which is on the terrestrial side, and what makes it unique on the ocean side. So typically the terrestrial carbon credits are typically carbon only, where the JBE Japan or the J Blue credits are carbon plus the other ecosystem services co-benefits. The durability of terrestrial projects are always in question because, fires happen and things happen 20, 30 years down the road. Where the Japanese approach is very much post-intervention. So the credit is only generated after we know for a fact that the restoration has in fact happened, and the carbon has been sequestered. So it's a very different way of looking at the future risk. Often the terrestrial ones are project developer based, where the ocean projects, at least in Japan, are very much community based, and we'll look into that. I'll show some statistics of that in the future, or in the next slides. Um, Again, terrestrial is great in the sense that they get lots of volume, but a little bit shaky in terms of credibility, as we've seen in the past. While the J Blue credits tend to be smaller volumes per project, but very much durable because the communities are the ones that are actively doing the restoration and have lived there for hundreds of years, so likely will continue to live there for hundreds of years and continue the project. So generally speaking, the J Blue credit certified projects tend to have higher integrity, higher value, and is really designed for those that want to see systemic change. While I think the terrestrial carbon credits are typically more compliance requirements, where it's just like, okay, we need to do this, so let's do it at the lowest available cost. So when I try to kind of envision what terrestrial or a typical carbon credit is versus, let's say, a J Blue credit, it's kind of the difference between UN food aid and a well-balanced meal. So in today's world, we kind of need both, but we tend to want to prefer to have a balanced meal where a lot of the other factors, a lot of the benefits of the of restoration is captured, as opposed to just the bare bones carbon. So the point really being is that we 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 need both, but I think we all want to prefer to move towards a more balanced credit that includes a lot of the other benefits as opposed to just carbon alone. And I think this is particularly important because I believe that there are many corporates that are not just looking to want to do compliance. They do want to be part of this systemic change. And as of today, the entire credit world today is pretty much only providing UN food aid and not really giving others an opportunity to engage much more deeply and acquire credits that provide much more value than just the carbon. So in terms of the developments, oh, there we go. So here's just a bit of a map of where the certified credits and projects are. You can see in Japan it's actually quite spread all over the country, so it's not centered in one particular geographic area. Uh, Here are just some statistics of the number of sites, the amount of tons of CO2 sequestered, the amount of area that has been restored. But the reason why I wanted to put this slide up here was actually more to do with the credit prices. So if you look at the credit prices throughout the journey of the JBlue credits, so 2020 and 2021 are essentially the pilot years. So it's hard to say if those numbers were really valid. But as the project scaled, the pricing maintained at in the US dollars around the $460 per ton level. So this kind of shows that there is an appetite for higher valued, higher integrity credits, and corporates that do want to be part of systemic change will play the role. So this is just another way of looking at the same data. But here's the part that I thought was kind of relevant, especially for policy. Uh, so when you look at who is generating these credits, 85% of all JBlue credits are developed and led by fishers, 69% municipalities, 52 private companies, NGOs, and academia. But the key here is that fishers who in some cultural contexts are often seen as kind of the bad guy in some conversations. In the Japanese context, they are the number one champions of the JBlue credits. So it's not really about fighting with other blue stakeholders, but rather it's about working together and co-designing with critical stakeholders that are part of our economy, are part of our communities. And I think this is a really important point to stress. Now, the reason why this doesn't add up to 100 is because many of these projects include multiple stakeholders, and the projects often have fisheries and municipalities and private companies working together, and that's why the numbers don't add up to 100. In terms of habitats restored, approximately 62% of the projects are for macroalgal beds, so seaweed beds. 33 are seagrass, 20% are algae farming, and 8% are tidal flats. So what does that mean? Well, if we take the cumulative area that is restored by the J Blue credit mechanism, we're looking at approximately 2,372 hectares, of which we estimate that 62% of that area is from wild kelp restoration. So when we look at Dr. Aaron Eager's report from 2023, and just as a rough approximation, what does that quantity of hectarage means? That essentially is greater than the next 10 countries on his report in terms of active restoration for kelp forests. Uh, does that mean that that's a significantly big number? In a way, yes, but in a way, no, because obviously the numbers from different countries are so minuscule that this looks big. But the point is that this market mechanism or this credit mechanism has allowed this type of funding and restoration to happen. If we were to, again, just ballpark figure roughly approximate what that means in terms of dollars and cents. So according to, again, Dr. Aaron Eager's paper, 1 hectare of Japanese kelp forest is worth around 280,000 US dollars. We multiply that by the 1,470 hectares restored, that's a value, an ecosystem services value of about 400 million. The actual credit amount that has been generated for that is only 4.2. So essentially, we're looking at a 98x return on this credit. So, whether you agree with the science or not, or whether you agree with the system or not, the point though is that this has allowed the catalyzation of private sector funding to do good for the oceans. And who are these corporates that are doing it? These are some of the biggest corporations in Japan that are part of the exercise. And I think this has to do, again, in part due to the fact that the credit is state approved. So rather than looking at the myriad of different credits and credit certifiers that are supported entirely by NGOs, where we don't know exactly which one is fully legit or not, when you have that state approved status, it definitely makes it easier for big corporates with compliance officers, with their accounting offices, with their legal departments to say, okay, you know what, maybe with this one, we can gamble on this one because it is state approved. Now, in terms of the ambitions of where this is going, so I wanted to kind of give a little bit of context of how this has all come together and where we see it going. And we can see it based on essentially the historic practice of the Japanese government. So in 2022, Japan formally declares that they want to be carbon neutral by 2050. Same year, they established Japan Blue Economy, and the first credits are issued in 2021. In 2023, uh, mangroves were included in the national determined contributions, and wild seaweeds were now included in the NDCs in 2024. So I believe Japan is the first and still the only country in the world that has submitted wild seaweed biomass as part of their IPCC reporting to the Paris Agreement. But what happened in February 2025, I think, is one of the it was a law that was quietly passed, but I think is quite relevant, especially in our space. Is that in this law, the Plan for Global Warming Countermeasures Act, they formally included blue carbon ecosystems as part of their national greenhouse gases accounting. They also set concrete numbers of how much blue carbon should be sequestered by 2035 and 2040. And they had a whole list of ambitious plans of how to further the research so that there's greater confidence behind the blue carbon science. So I'm going to take a few quotes from our director, Dr. Tomohiro Kuae, to kind of put into perspective where the JBE sees particularly seaweed farming and where that's going to go in the country. So the first quote is that with Japan's area suitable for seaweed growth, we can expect 50 million tons worth of annual sequestration. 50 million tons. So I think Norway does 1.2 million tons worth of salmon. So Japan's plan, or Japan has the capability to sequester 50 million tons worth of carbon through seaweed growth. However, to achieve this, we'll need to farm seaweed at an unprecedented scale compared to the farming we do for food. There's a high probability that growth will happen near wind farm infrastructure. So the amount of seaweed farming that we can do in the very near shore ecosystems where we grow seaweeds today is probably not going to be where the 50 million tons is going to come from. It will very likely come from areas not so far as the continental or outside of the economic zone, but very much where we see the continental shelf and where the seaweed doesn't go back into the cycle near shore. The other point that I think is really important to think about is the fact that reduction alone will have its limitations, particularly when it's been reported many times now that Japanese forests, so the terrestrial side of sequestration is declining because the forests are getting old. So our professor is saying that the blue carbon angle will be one of Japan's trump cards to achieve carbon neutrality. So I wanted to close my presentation with kind of now these are more my thoughts, so I wouldn't take this with a block of salt, but based on my experiences so far and the discussions I've had, I thought I would just share a few key points and thoughts that might get the conversation going. So the first is about seaweeds as a viable gigaton scale strategy. So Japan looks like it's planning to move in this direction. Research to assess what is happening to the seaweed that does get deposited and sequestered into the deep. And we don't see that changing, we see that accelerating. So the question is, okay, if Japan is going down that path, well, what do other countries that have similar topographies and similar climates as Japan, will they take inspiration from this, perhaps? The other thing is that the current seaweed industry that is developing in the West likely holds one of the critical keys to 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 replicate the kind of effort that Japan is now embarking upon. And I think that that's really important and exciting to think about because when we look at the seaweed industry in the West, it definitely is very much a rounding error compared to what is happening in the East. But the way the seaweed farmers are approaching kelp farming in the West, I think, is much more with a big scalability in mind. So I think that a lot of these players who, and many of them are still struggling to try to figure out their business model, but the science and the technical expertise that is there could be worth its weight in gold. We also think that offshore seaweed cultivation could become a whole new segment for the offshore and the maritime industries, in particularly in coastal countries. So rather than finding another way to extract more oil from the North Sea, we could potentially see that same infrastructure actually contributing to a nature positive and biodiversity positive industry going forward. But I think the other kind of almost how should we say it? A little bit fantasy slash sci-fi reality vision is about, okay, so what happens if Japan, let's say by 2050, achieves 50 million tons worth of carbon sequestration through seaweed farming? That essentially means that there's going to be a biomass of at least that much, if not significantly more, that is now available, either for long-term sequestration or for use as a feedstock into whatever potential industry that's out there. So I think that is one of the other things to keep in mind is that as an effort in scaling up for using nature-based solutions to approach net zero, it's also going to create that feedstock that could potentially fuel whole new industries that don't have to rely on fossil fuels anymore. So then as for my questions, okay, so we know that Japan is not alone. So Korea and China are also working down the same path. And if they are moving ahead, okay, so what are other kelp kelp possessing countries going to do, like Norway, the United Kingdom, France, Portugal, and such? The other thing is that the seaweeds grow 100% within country's EEZ. But Article 6 now opens up the possibility to start looking at seaweed farming or ocean-based blue carbon opportunities in other parts of the world. How are we going to behave? Are we just going to in the West? And I say as a person, as a Japanese person living in Norway, are we the emitters of the global North just going to buy ourselves out of our problem by buying credits from developing countries that have lower costs of producing blue carbon credits, or are we going to try to restore the ecosystems that are closer to us as part of our own national plans and interests? Um, so I think what it does is it forces a challenging question to other governments around the world that are blessed with blue ecosystems, particularly seaweed ones in the emitting north. Uh, are countries going to go, let's say, the Japan route, where they try to establish high value, high integrity credits, and then as the cost structure of these credits come down, the market prices adjust, or is it going to go the other way around, where we try to secure as many credits as possible? It might be lower in integrity, it might not have the greatest value and value, but do we go, large and cheap and then try to improve? I don't know if there's a right answer at this point in time. Um, but it is true that there is a lot more uncertainty in the oceans than there is on land. And so to me, the large scale, lower integrity approach probably doesn't fit very well with the current scientific status of where we are. But it is a legitimate question that governments are going to have to struggle with. But the point, though, the fact that blue ecosystems, particularly seaweeds, are now being considered, I think, is a very important step. And yeah, as Japan and potentially Korea and China and other countries join and include seaweeds in their NDCs as well as their national strategies, it's going to require us in the West to kind of ask the same question: what are we going to do? So on that note, I think I'll close my presentation and I'll open it up to questions or comments, thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Very interesting conversation, and want to highlight the cost of inaction, the independent research cooperative to which the government is working with, and the amount of seaweed restored, of course. You just want mention that you're going to translate very soon this mechanism. So for the one that asked the question, how is it working exactly? This document should be released in English very soon. And maybe one question to start before I leave the floor to maybe state representative, as it was a part of the title of this event, how this mechanism has allowed private company to engage with farmers. That was the point of our discussion. I think it's interesting.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the pieces of the credit mechanism that I think is really exciting is the co-design that happens through this the Japan Blue Economy's J Blue credit. Essentially, many of these big corporations have no real touch point or no real reason even to engage with local coastal fisheries communities or fisheries cooperatives or small hold seaweed farmers. But through the credit mechanism, it's creating an opportunity where corporates, and often the big corporates that have also really cool technologies, to actually sit down and talk with the coastal communities, because the coastal communities have the access to the sea and the rights, but they don't know how to deploy various cool new technologies. So what we're finding is that projects are developing between the communities and the corporates. And ultimately, it's the same corporate that wants to buy their own credits back. So it's really about creating that touch point where we're allowed to co-create and co-design. And I think that that's part of the reason why you'll see and like all of the projects that are credited by the J Blue credits, they're public and each project will show you what they do and how they do it. And you'll see that there's a lot of big corporates using some pretty cool technologies to try to improve the marine ecosystems. And not all of them are going to be the kind of projects that the Western countries will immediately say yes to. I mean, some of them, probably will be seen as quite dodgy an Occidental perspective. But yes, the co-design I think is super critical, and it's really about creating an opportunity for coastal communities and corporates to sit down and talk.
Thank you for this answer. So there is a lot of question in the chat, very interesting one, but I see some governments are online and it was really targeted as it's a government-led initiative. So if France, Brazil, I see also European representative as Maris, you want to start and ask question or react, please do. Otherwise, I'm gonna start reading question in the chat. Okay. So first question, how do you justify seaweed farming for carbon credit given the controversy around it?
Okay. So the way the seaweed carbon is calculated is essentially based on the four types of carbon sequestration that has been recognized. There's the particle dissolved organic particle organic carbon, right? And then it's the dissolved, and then there's the refractory, and then the amount that gets sequestered in the sediment. The seaweed, not the seaweed that is harvested, because the seaweed that is harvested and used in food or processed in some other application, that does not count towards the credit. It's really the amount of seaweed that is growing and just falls off. And that gets included in the calculation, as well as, of course, the particulate matter that you can't really see, but is still releasing and getting deposited. So I think the key is to just kind of separate a little bit. We're not the JBE system doesn't recognize carbon sequestration in the sense that it's the entire seaweed biomass, especially if it is being used for other purposes. So maybe that might help clarify that point. Seaweed farming does it sequester as much? Well, in terms of the amount of the particles, it looks like it's not that different to wild biomasses, as per Dr. Carlos Duarte's paper and such. So I think the controversy could come from the fact that if you credit seaweed that is being used for some other purpose, yeah, get it, and it shouldn't happen. But that's not what the JBLE credits do. I think that was the context of the question.
Think so too, unless the person that asked the question want to react. I'm looking at questions that had a lot of success. So the second one is, what is the method to measure carbon sequestration by seaweed? Maybe that would be in the paper, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'll let rather than me, the non-doctor, to try to explain it to really smart people in this conference this conference call. I'm really hoping that paper will because the methodology is the part that is currently being translated, but it's all underpinned by scientific papers that has been published in English. So it is based on published science, primarily Dr. Kuai's office, but also from many of our colleagues here in the space. But yeah, happy to share the actual answer shortly.
Melanie, sorry to interrupt. This is Oscar. I'm a Kenyan calling in from the United States. I'm the one who asked the question. I wasn't fast enough to unmute, but it's still sort of a gray area. How do you calculate the seaweed that falls off from farmed seaweed? Is it a percentage, or how do you go about it?
So again, I think the best way to answer that, and is partially a dodge from my perspective, but it is to refer to that methodology, which I will be able to share shortly in English, and that will have the reference papers as well as the calculation methodology. I'm just we're the document is actually almost done. We just need to get it signed off on the right people so that we can make it public. But we'll make sure to share it through the Global Seaweed Coalition.
Next question. How many buyers are there currently in Japan? The credit is quite expensive compared to other durable CDR, for instance, biochar.
Yes. It is technically an open market. So technically anyone can buy it, but I think there's definitely a strong correlation between those companies that are actually doing the projects and those that actually want to buy those credits. So I think what you'll find is that as the co-design happens, the number one candidate buyer is the co-designer. So so I guess the word market might create the wrong impression in the sense that we're not talking about large volumes of commoditized products being traded and had the pricing increasing and decreasing depending on demand. It's very much almost like what would a good comparison be? It's almost like an auction market where the auctioneer is presenting the case. Here's the amount of carbon that was sequestered. Here's the biodiversity benefits. Here's the project. Here's the location. Here's the community, and there's a whole story around it. And the buyers are essentially looking at various projects and saying, you know what, I want to buy that one. And there's various different motivations behind why they want to buy it. So it's not like this anonymous numeric trade of commodities. It's very much like a thorough assessment of this project. Does that project align with my corporate initiatives? Does it align with our geographic focus? It very much takes into other factors than just the pure commoditized carbon aspect of it. So, yeah, I mean, technically it's open to everyone, well, in the sense that it's open to Japanese registered companies, so it's still within the confines of Japan. But yeah, it's quite different. It's not like the success is not a function of the number of buyers or number of sellers, in absolute terms.
Okay. Do you know some concrete example of deep ocean sequestration of farm seaweed? It seems that farming is contributing to capture rather than sequestration. Is capture valued as a blue carbon credit as well?
Captured. So let me see if I understood that question. Are we saying that?
M-
Uh,
Maybe Sylvain, you want to clarify your question?
because right now the only carbon that is included in the JBlue credit is really the stuff that goes into the deep sea.
Yeah.
It's
I-
not anything else. We don't count the standing stock. Although, I'm sure one day if the science, becomes strong enough, maybe that could be. But as of today, it's really just the refractory dissolved organic carbons and all that stuff that goes down into the deep, from my understanding. So it's not the standing stock of seaweed there.
Yeah, I think that was the question. Do you capture the CO2 that is
Yeah, that it's actually
taken?
growing
Yeah.
on. Right. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, like even when the seaweed is growing, it's still releasing all that stuff, right? So in that sense, I guess it kind of is, but
Mm,
I think most people are wondering whether the blades that are actually sitting on the ropes are included, right? I think that's probably where that
yeah.
question came from.
Yeah. You still have some energy for a couple of more questions, Brian?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Also, just to for everyone, I'd love for us to also connect on LinkedIn as well. I think that's also a great way for us to stay in touch and ask any further questions or comments, and also, as we disseminate the documents, just in case we don't catch you, it'd be great to connect and keep the dialogue going.
I see we have a live question. Exciting. Eduardo, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brian, for the presentation. It was excellent. So that was the idea to have a live question instead of a rating. Well, I'm Brazilian. I work for the Brazilian government, so it's going to be like a governmental approach in my question. So you were like commenting that seaweeds um, are can be covered by Article 6, what opens the door for cross-border trade of credits. So I'd like to know a little bit more because this carbon trade uh, is basically a commitment. So I'd like to know how the Japanese government intends to engage and to make available this opportunity for other countries now to unlock financial support for developing countries in the sense that it's like a commitment. And
So,
I'd like,
please.
yes. And the second point, I'd like to know a little bit more about this contradiction that shouldn't be between wild and cultivated seaweeds, because we believe that one project can be a mechanism to even to repopulate natural banks. So this is the proposal we'll try to inspire and encourage here in Brazil. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question. So just to be very clear, I do not represent the Japanese government. I am here on behalf of the Japan Blue economy, so I can't speak on behalf of the state. However, what I can say though is that Article 6 is like the big beast that everyone is trying to figure out, and I don't think anyone really has a very, very clear idea as to how it's going to work. The last conversation I had about Article 6 was really the JBE position is that we are open to investigating and learning. So I think there's a lot of questions on both sides. It's just that we know that and we know it's there, but we're not entirely sure how it's going to influence the trajectory going forward. My my personal thoughts on this is that for countries like Japan, where it has massive emissions, but also has a supply chain outside of their own country, that it's quite likely that the interest for such trading will likely happen in places where they have a supply chain relationship, like in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and Thailand, where Japan has a major economic presence. Um, but yes, I dare not speak out of turn and mention anything about how the state would operate because that's not my position. And I think your second question was about the potential conflict or co contradiction between wild and farm seaweeds. I fully agree with your assessment that I think farm seaweeds can contribute also to wild restoration. Um, uh, but I don't see it so much as a conflict. I mean, the biomass is still the same. The 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 algae still produces the carbon and contributes to the biodiversity in quite similar ways. So I don't really see it as a contradiction. The fact, well, I think first of all, the fact that Japan has included seaweeds into their NDCs, I think is one of the first key steps to signal domestically, but also internationally that, okay, seaweeds is not the long lost cousin that is ignored by the guidance from the wetlands documentation. And so I think uh, just because there is no guidance according to the IPCC doesn't mean that it can't be included. And I think Japan has kind of set that precedent, and hopefully Korea and China joining hopefully soon will kind of make it from the exception to kind of the trend. And then it'll force other countries to really, do some deep soul searching and think, maybe we should kind of look into this too, given that 80% of our coastline is seaweed based. So hopefully that will, get the dialogue going. In terms of the farm side, I think because it seems that farm seaweeds and wild seaweeds emit the same amount, more or less the same amount of carbon. I think as the science improves, we're going to see that difference that you see is going to converge a lot more. And hopefully that will make, I see wild and farmed seaweeds as kind of like cousins that should be helping each other. And I think that's how I would like to see the world develop. But that's my personal opinion.
Thank you so much for this answer, and I would like to encourage also Japanese government to join this UN Global Seaweed Initiative. So, Eduardo, as a government representative, if you can invite Japanese government through Brian, would be really interesting to learn directly from them too.
Yeah, so that's also just one thing. So, uh, because JBE is part of the Ministry of Infrastructure, we're, there's only so much we can do. But as state representatives, if you reach out to the Japanese Foreign Office, and have that conversation. That triggers a whole nother process of dialogue. So, which is far, way over, my pay grade. But, if there's genuine interest, on a bilateral level to engage beyond, kind of this basic information sharing, I'm quite confident that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would be very happy to have that conversation and explore ways to answer that question, Eduardo, about how two states could potentially trade and bring nature financing across borders.
And that's also one of the objectives of this initiative to include seaweed more in NDC. So it really makes sense.
Yeah.
I think we have time for this last question, and then we'll close up the session. What percentage of the total Blue Credit revenue go to community like fishers? What does credit income mean for fisher and other communities? Is it large enough or replace the income from fishing, for example?
Okay, so I think what I could say is that often, so unlike the credits that we often hear developed by project developers who then allocate a certain percentage of the credit value to the community, it's usually the communities that are actually building the credits themselves. So literally 100% of that sale of the credit goes to that community that's actually doing it. So it's a little bit of a different model, and I think it's because in typical carbon credit projects, it's in terrestrial cases, it's a third party that's raised funds that are trying to deploy it in developing countries that don't have access to capital, don't know how to get it started. In Japan, I guess the case is a little bit different because you have coastal communities that can get these projects off the ground. So in that sense, those credits that are generated by the communities literally 100% goes to the community. If the community and the fisheries cooperatives and the local municipality are pooling resources, then they have their own division formula that they establish prior to submitting the credit application. So we know before going into it how it's going to be divided, and that's really dependent on how the credit developers establish the credit. But generally speaking, if it's the fisheries communities or the communities themselves, they literally get it, everything because they're the ones that own it. So and the other thing to keep in mind is also in the JBE methodology, only one credit transaction is allowed, meaning that you can't have an intermediary that hoards and manipulates the markets. Essentially, you're the producer, you're the buyer, and that's it. So it really forces, or it helps ensure that the funds stay within the players that it should be. No real room for arbitrage, no real room for or creating artificial shortages or extra supply to manipulate the pricing. It's a really cool design, right? Because like it's designed based on as an independent scientific cooperative, right? It didn't have to bow to political pressure or some of the other factors that typically come in when we try to design these things. So it's, a bunch of really smart scientists that are saying, yeah, okay, how do we do this to generate the most effect, get the highest prices, and ensure that the communities are well taken care of. So what you'll find is a lot of the typical iffy aspects of the carbon space. You'll find that a lot of the design behind the credit is actually designed to ward away or avoid the typical challenges that we saw in the terrestrial carbon markets.
Well, thank you very much for answering all those questions. I see one last comment in the chat from Indonesian government. Japan is very much welcome to be part of the UN Global Seaweed Initiative. Brian, please help communicate to Japan governments. So very, very good outcome. That was kind of my goal, organizing also this event. So thank you everyone that has joined this webinar. Thank you for engaging with us. We'll run other webinars, the Global Seaweed Coalition. The next one will be probably on seaweed and iodine, linked to the nutrition debate. And if you are not already part of the Global Seaweed Coalition as a member, I encourage you to do so, so you will get this information on webinar way ahead. And it's free. Probably one of my colleagues will put the link in the chat. But take part of this community. We're more than 2,000 members now. And the more we are, the merrier it is. So unless there is another burning last comment, I can pass the floor to Philippe to conclude and have the closing remarks.
Thank you, Melanie. So thank you, Brian, for this really inspiring talk and for all the questions it has generated. So it's really important. And of course, there is much more to ask, I'm sure. And personally, I have also additional questions. And what I really also appreciated in what the approach you took in Japan is that your initiative is really science-based, and it also is willing to evolve with the evolution of science. So that this is very important, and I'm sure that the Japanese government is also supporting specific programs which will increase the knowledge about the mechanisms which are related to carbon sequestration by different marine ecosystems, and that will be decisive for the blue economy we are all dreaming. Of course, we will. What was not discussed today is we will be probably in competition with other solutions for solving NDC in the ocean. There is also a lot of technologies which are studied. There is many startup companies which are considering that there is also other options. And we will have also to discuss with other stakeholders, especially in the context of development of our marine renewable energies. I think especially to the wind farms, it will not be so simple to convince the wind farm operators that we can also combine other aquacultures in the wind farm parks. And this is something which is at work globally, in fact. And for that, we have really to cooperate between the different countries and through the UN organization facilities for really having this dialogue. So I really thank you. I really thank all the people who attended this meeting today. And of course, I also warmly thank Melanie and all the Secretariat of the Global Seaweed Coalition for making this event possible, and also for the support we also receive from several organizations helping to organize this event. So thank you very much. And Melanie, you can just also close the meeting, I think. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.